Good afternoon and good evening to everyone who's joining in to the conversation on today. We are so glad that you are joining us. We know that you are going to be blessed by this iteration today as well. Vaccinate. Should you get the vaccine or not? That's what we're going to discuss today on the conversation. We have some noted professors, educators, scientists, spiritual advisors who are going to engage in this conversation today to help us answer this question. Should we or should we not vaccinate, receive the COVID-19 vaccine? I am Pastor Michael Jenkins. I'm the administrative pastor of the Kansas Avenue Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm going to be joined here shortly by my co-host, Pastor Ed McBride, who is the youth pastor of the Kansas Avenue SDA Church. In the background, as always, we have Pastor Keith Morris, the senior pastor at Kansas Avenue, and we have Hansel Fletcher, who helps us keep things running smoothly. Let's have a word of prayer, then we will introduce our guest and get right into the conversation. Father in heaven, we're glad to be at this point again, and we pray that you would bless us with wisdom, that you would bless us with knowledge, and that you would be with us throughout this conversation today, and that we would have the right answers and information that we need to make an informed decision, Lord, so that we can stay safe and so that we can stay healthy. I pray that you would be with everyone who is gathering with us today and those who are listening. May we be blessed and lifted up closer to you. In Jesus' name we ask. Amen. Now let's introduce those. I'm going to ask that they would be brought onto the screen at this time, who are part of our guests and panelists. Here it comes, slowly but surely. We have quite a big field on today, which should add to the conversation and make it just a little bit more robust. We have Whitney Braun, who is a bioethicist, a professor, investigative researcher, and documentary filmmaker who has been featured on the Discovery Channel, NPR, National Geographic Channel as well, and she has served as a contributor for the Huffington Post. She currently serves as the program director for the MA in Bioethics and an assistant professor of ethics at Loma Linda University. Welcome, Whitney Braun.
Pleasure.
Also, Milton Brown is with us. Milton Brown currently serves as a professor of practice and director for the Center of Drug Discovery for Rare and Underserved Diseases at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, and a fellow at the National Academy of Inventors. His distinguished career has led to his international recognition as a leader in drug discovery and development research. And so we welcome you to the conversation as well. Lisa Clark Diller, no stranger to the conversation. She's been here before, and we're glad to have her back again. And Lisa Clark Diller is the departmental chair for the History and Political Studies Department at Southern Adventist University. She enjoys teaching early modern history and brings some of that historical perspective to the discussion today. And we have Michael Hogue. We welcome you as well. Dean Hogue became the Dean of the School of Pharmacy in January 2019 after serving in several administrative and clinical roles at Samford University, which is in Birmingham, Alabama. He is 165th president of the American Pharmacists Association, the oldest and largest pharmacy association in the United States. So we're glad to have him. Dr. Hogue is nationally known for his expertise and work in immunizations and vaccines. And in 2020, this year, he was appointed by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices for the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine work group. And we have Dr. Pastor Timothy Nixon. Wide experience in pastoral ministry and teaching is what he has. And he has taught youth ministry leadership, public evangelism, and homiletics and preaching for Andrews University's Theological Seminary. And from 2014 to 2018, Pastor Nixon served as the executive secretary of the Lake Region Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. And he is presently serving as the pastor of the Niles, Philadelphia, and All Nations Berrien Springs SDA churches in the Lake Region Conference. Welcome, Dr. Nixon. And Uhura Williams currently serves as the dean College of Arts and Sciences at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. He was slated to leave the Twin Cities for a prestigious position at St. John's University in New York City this past June, but Uhura Williams instead decided to stay at the University of St. Thomas as a founding director of the school's Racial Justice Initiative. He is a distinguished scholar of the Black Power and Civil Rights movements, and he frequently writes and speaks on current affairs, making several television appearances. And he's no stranger to the conversation, and he is a favorite of the conversation because of his vast historical insights and perspectives. So we say welcome to all of you today, and we're going to have a great conversation. To those who are watching and listening, if you're on Facebook or YouTube, we ask that you would share this from the page that you're watching to your own page, or share the link with others so that we can grow our audience. But I want to get to our first question. The vaccine, this news, and it has been in the news for quite some time now. In the last few days, we've been hearing so much about it. Some feel that it's been rushed, that its development has been rushed, that the trials have been rushed, and there's just a lot of questions and speculation. And we're hoping that you can help us with that. Under normal circumstances, vaccines can take months and even years to develop, but we know that 2020 is not normal circumstances. So, what are the different vaccines out there? How many vaccines are there? We hear so many different ones, and some take 2 doses and some take 1 dose. And how trustworthy is the process of development? So, let's just start right there. Tell us about the vaccines, just the basics. What is out there? What has been approved? We know that there's some recent approval that has just taken place, and so let's start there. Just give us the basic information about the vaccine. What do you know about it, and what can you tell us? And that's a general question. Let me just throw it out there.
I'll be happy to jump in just a little bit on that. So there's actually several COVID vaccines under development, but the one that we've heard the most about just this week is from Pfizer and a German company called BioNTech. The vaccine was developed over a period of only about 12 months, which is pretty fast for a vaccine. And the reason it could happen that fast is because the DNA sequence of the virus, of the coronavirus, was sequenced very, very quickly. In early January, we knew what the DNA sequence was of the virus, and the manufacturers were able to then replicate that and create a vaccine literally within days. They were able to come up with a candidate within days of having that DNA sequence. So that's pretty cool that they were able to do that. And then we were able to get that vaccine into trials very quickly. And the reason it was accelerated, and I think the simplest way for me at least to understand this, is that normally there are 3 phases to vaccine development. And if all 3 of those phases go the way that they're supposed to, and we get positive outcomes, then we start production of the vaccine, which normally takes quite a long time, sometimes a year or more in and of itself. This time what happened was those phases were consolidated. They all happened concurrent to each other, and the U.S. government pre-purchased vaccines so that the manufacturers wouldn't have the liability of that, and production started before the studies ever ended. And so as a result of that, vaccine was produced and ready to go to market. Now, had the vaccine failed and not been successful in clinical trials, we'd have wasted all that money and wasted all
That was
those.
going to be a question of mine, because if you start production before the trials end,
a little bit of a chance. That's right.
Okay. Wow. Well, that's very interesting. So it's almost like the perfect storm of development for the vaccine is basically not only the development but the trials and making this ready. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. Let me jump in a little bit because drug discovery and development, that's what I've done for the last 20 years. And we actually need 4 stages of development. Phase 1 is safety. Phase 2 is efficacy in a small amount of people. Usually we do it in less than 40 patients. Phase 3 is efficacy and longer term safety. And then phase 4 is large studies in a larger number of people. The current vaccines, those from Moderna and from Pfizer, are mRNA vaccines. So they're from the message that produces the protein. So when you inject the messenger RNA into a person's cell, like your muscle cell, that messenger RNA is from the virus. And so that messenger RNA is injected into your cell, and your cell produces a protein based on that messaging RNA. Now, the protein it produces is a viral protein coded for the spike protein that's important for infection. And when your body makes that protein, your cells will put it out on the outside of the cell, and it will see it as a non self protein, as something that it should mount an immune response against. So it mounts an immune response against the protein that was made from the mRNA that was injected into your cells. And that's how that vaccine works. They're different from the vaccines that are in the UK from AstraZeneca, which is a live attenuated protein vaccine that is placed in an injection as well. And so because the mRNA technology has never been used in people, well, we've used it in trials, but in cancer therapy, but we've really never used this treatment in people. We have a long ways to go into really understanding, is it efficacious or is it safe? And we'll learn it. This will be the great American experiment in our healthcare workers.
So, given what you said and what the two of you have said, can we trust the vaccine? Can we trust to take the vaccine? We see that former presidents have said they're willing to take it live and on TV, and others, with status, have said the same thing because they're trying to show the public that they're confident in what has been developed. But the general public, many of us, are very skeptical still because of it being so fast. And we're like, how can you do this so quickly? So, given what was just said, help us understand: is it safe? Should I wait? We don't want to tear down confidence, and we don't want to build up false confidence, but we want to be real with everybody. So how can you answer that question for us?
Here's what I'd say. I think the answer in short is yes. I feel confident about the vaccine and I'm willing to take it. And here's why. If you look back at the last 20 years at the vaccines that have come to market in the United States, and you look at the number of people who were involved in those clinical trials, according to the FDA, the average study that was done on vaccines that were approved to market, fully approved to market, had about 27,000 people in those studies on average. This study from Pfizer and the one from Moderna, the Pfizer study had about 40,000 people in it, and the Moderna study about 30,000 people in it. So larger, they're actually larger in terms of the number of people. What we don't have is the length of time that those vaccines are administered compared to what we normally have. We normally have about 2 years worth of data. We only have 2 months worth of data this time. So that's the difference. But the good news is, and the early results that were just released with the Pfizer vaccine, and hopefully we'll see the same thing with the Moderna vaccine, but what we saw with the Pfizer vaccine is that almost a huge majority, large majority, 80% of people who receive the vaccine have a sore arm, and it's worse with the second dose than it is with the first dose, but it's relieved pretty quickly with Tylenol or ibuprofen, with acetaminophen or ibuprofen, and it goes away. And there's about 10% of people who have a fever after they have received the vaccine. And that usually happens on the second day after you get the vaccine, and it usually resolves within 24 hours. So the 10% of people, or 1 in 10 who get a fever, are generally going to have that fever go away within a couple of days. And then the last thing I can tell you is that there were 4 people in the study on the side that got the vaccine that developed something called Bell's palsy, which is a temporary paralysis on one side of the face of the muscles, the nerves on one side of the face. And in all 4 of those people, that resolved relatively quickly without any long-term sequelae. We don't really know for sure if that was related or caused by the vaccine, or if it's just a coincidence because it was so few number of people. So those are the things we know about that might be risks associated with the vaccine, Pastor.
Understood. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. Now, yesterday we saw.
Pastor, could I put in just a little bit of more information, because I sit on the other side. I don't really I don't see this vaccine as being safe and effective, and the reason why is based on reading the data. The data that was submitted to the FDA, the first data they showed was 7-day data. That means they gave the vaccine 2 weeks later. They gave the second dose. And then 7 days later, they looked into patients that had been given the vaccine, which was 15,000, and then they gave 15,000 people saline. They saw 5 people that got COVID-19 that had the vaccine, and none of them had a serious sequelae, which is a multi-organ, multi-disease problem that we treat. the group that the people who got saline, 90 people got COVID-19, and 5 of those people had a serious sequelae. So based on that, they came up with the number of 95 to 97% effective. But that data was after 7 days of treatment with the virus. The second data was released, it was 14 days after treating with the vaccine. And so I think the maximum now that we have, at least that's been given to us in the general public, is 21 days after the last vaccine dose. They're saying that it was safe and for those people effective. It's kind of hard to understand effective based on no one was challenged with the virus, and also everyone had, most of the people that were released into the study continue to wear their masks. So the only real substantial information that we could learn is, well, did anybody who got the vaccine, did they have a serious sequelae? And I want to tell you that the answer to that now, as of yesterday, is yes. There was a notice that was placed by the UK for the Pfizer vaccine yesterday. The UK regulators warned, and I will read for your hearing. They warned people with a history of significant allergies who have allergic reactions to medicines or food that require, and they call it adrenaline auto injector. We call it an EpiPen. So if you have a food allergy or a medicine allergy, you should not get the Pfizer vaccine according to the regulators. That was put out as a severe adverse effect in 2 patients who had severe hypersensitivity reactions. On top of that, it was released 2 days ago that the FDA announced that there were patient 1 that occurred when taking the Pfizer vaccine. There were 2 patients. One was a 55-year-old male who had cardiovascular arrest after the second shot. Now, the second patient, that person had arteriosclerosis, which is probably what the first patient had as well. And that person died 3 days after the first shot. Now, we don't know completely if both of these patients, because they had arteriosclerosis and cardiac arrest, we don't know if arteriosclerosis may become a risk factor for a bad outcome with the vaccine. But it raises a question. We have 2 people that died, and we can't just say it didn't occur because they got the vaccine. It's not related to the vaccine.
Yeah, so
there's
these are
not
the
enough
pitfalls
time.
you're basically telling us of not having enough time, exactly, to
It's not enough time,
go
and
through
so
the trials. Now,
right.
let me ask this question though, in terms of the UK, because I know that they rolled the vaccine out earlier, and I think Canada as well had approved it before we did. How much longer, or has the vaccine been approved in the UK that they have more information than we have here?
I think they're probably a month ahead of us.
Okay.
Maybe a little less than that. It's only a couple weeks, and Canada approved it just 2 days before we did in the U.S.
Okay.
So not a lot more data. Can I just add one other thing here? I appreciate the comments that have been made. I don't have the same concerns, partly because we don't know. I mean, I think the honest answer is that until enough time passes, we won't know exactly what the effects are. You know, if you look at a population, death is going to happen in a population. And if you look whether you give a vaccine or you don't give a vaccine, there's a certain number of people are going to naturally die. That's what happens. And so when you're looking to try to figure out, well, did a vaccine cause death, or did death happen just because it was the natural occurrence of things? The number of people who died in this study was about the same in the 2 groups. And so it was actually lower than it would be in the normal population that would have had no intervention whatsoever. So we don't really have any information that would tell us that the vaccine caused anybody to die. And we really don't have any information that tells us that the vaccine caused these serious adverse events that were mentioned. The UK, I think, is doing a prudent thing by saying that we want to be cautious, and because we don't know for sure what happened, if somebody's had a serious allergic reaction to a previous dose of a vaccine or has a serious anaphylaxis condition, then we want to use some caution because we don't know enough yet to know if the vaccine causes that or if it doesn't, and we'll know more over time.
Now, the vaccine's been politicized. We see the president has just yesterday was pressuring the FDA chief to approve the vaccine. How should we feel about that when it weighs into our decision of whether or not to take the vaccine? And let me couple it with this question. Are there any kind of press releases, or have there been any talk of making the vaccine mandatory for citizens? Because, of course, if we have a choice, you don't have to take it if you don't want to. Or maybe it could be mandatory if you want to go into certain places or if you want to travel. We don't know, but it has been politicized in many ways. So talk to us about that, and should we be concerned? Is this because it's been politicized? Is that why it's been rushed, or because of the pandemic itself, and we just need to get it out to save lives?
Well, I can add some historical context here. So the landmark Supreme Court case that sort of dictates whether or not a vaccine can be mandated is the Jacobson v. Massachusetts case from 1905. That's an interesting case to look at because so the backstory on that is that Henning Jacobson was the pastor of a church in Cambridge, Massachusetts, near Harvard University, very kind of noted theologian, intellectual in the community. And he had taken he and his son had both been vaccinated for smallpox, which was a very different variation of the vaccine that many of us got as children for smallpox. We've stopped doing that here in the United States, but he and his son had adverse effects. He blamed, back in 1905, actually, some of his son's intellectual disability on the vaccine. And so when smallpox was ravaging the greater Boston area, again in 1905, he was living in Cambridge, which at the time, public health was very localized. And so the public health authorities in Cambridge, Massachusetts said it is required that everybody get the vaccine. If you don't get the vaccine, you have to pay a fine. So Henning Jacobson said, not only am I not getting the vaccine, you can't punish me for it by taking my money. And so he then said this to his congregation. His congregation in turn said, we're not getting the vaccine. If the pastor is not getting the vaccine, we're not getting the vaccine. And the public health authorities in Massachusetts said this is setting a very dangerous precedent, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court ruled that if there is a public health burden great enough, the states can mandate a vaccine. However, they also said if you can prove that there would be an undue physical burden placed on you by getting the vaccine, you can get an exemption. So it did establish that there is a legal authority that the states have to implement and mandate vaccination, but it also left a door open. That's actually not really a door. It's kind of the Holland Tunnel. You can drive a truck through it, right? Because how can anyone prove, right, that a vaccine is going to cause them undue harm if they haven't had it yet? So it's really a very vague legislative use of language. Because I could say, I, Whitney, right? I'm getting married. I want to start a family. I am nervous because I want to get pregnant, and I don't know that the vaccine may not cause undue burden on me as a woman trying to start a family. I don't know that. So legally, I do have recourse to say I don't want to get it. But it's very, very vague. And so I wish I had a hard and fast answer for that, but I don't.
What about when it comes to religious liberties? Because, you said the pastor said, I don't want to get it. And
Yeah.
Dr. Nixon, you can chime in on this as well, on the spiritual implications of taking this or not taking it based on your conscience. If you feel that, I don't want to take vaccines for whatever reason, there could be some religious groups out there that say, I don't want to take vaccines. We know that there's some that don't want blood transfusions. So can you talk to us about that?
There is a serious issue about the rushing of the vaccine, and why is it being rushed? When you look at the number of worldwide cases for coronavirus. There's 71 million cases worldwide. And of the 71 million cases, 57 million of the cases come from Europe, Asia, and North America. That's 80% of the cases. And of the deaths, 1,600,000, 75% of the deaths come from those three countries. So what we're talking about is that the ones who are being most severely impacted by the coronavirus have been really the Western world. That's where money is being spent. That's where money is being generated. The economy is being hit in this world by this virus. It's being rushed. So the question has to be asked, why is this being rushed? What is really behind it? Is it health or is it money and finance? This is the question that really has to be asked. Who is really suffering because of this and what is behind it? And these are the real issues that we really need to be addressing. Is this being rushed because of economic reasons and because of the desire to make sure that the economy does not collapse? And how much are we putting the health of people at risk to get a vaccine out of there because we are concerned about the economy? And so that has spiritual implications as well, because the issue, the Bible says no man can serve two masters. You can't serve God and man. You can't serve God and mammon. And of course, the Bible talks about the love of money being the root of all evil. And so we have to be very careful about what's going on right now. When you look at the issue of this virus initially happening, it's very interesting that the virus did not touch the poorer areas of the world initially, and it still has not touched the poorer areas of the world. Where usually these pandemics happen, the usual areas that usually are hit by pandemics are the poorer areas of the world, but that has not happened with this virus. The poorer areas of the world have not been hit by this virus. It has been the wealthy areas of the world that have been hit by this virus. And so how this is being handled is very interesting. Very interesting what's been happening. And so we need to understand what's going on here and why things are happening the way they're happening and what's driving this and how corners are being cut to have this happen. And so all of these have very serious moral implications about why this is going on the way it's going on right now. And a lot of people are saying a lot of things about this is safe now. And we can do this, and the medical professionals are going forward, and all of these people are going to take the vaccination and shots. But only time will tell truly how safe this vaccine will be. Only time will truly tell.
Or effective, Pastor Nick. Let me say this. We know that the antibodies only last about 90 days. That's what the larger studies have shown. The antibodies to COVID, when you're infected, only last about 90 days. We've been shown data from 7 days, from 14 days, from 21 days. We haven't got to 90 days. And I know there's a study out there in JAMA that showed that the patients, in 35 patients, that they went out to 120 days. But a vaccine that may not be protective much longer than that will not be successful. And so we have to be very, very careful, as you said, with this vaccine in regards to safety and efficacy. I don't care about efficacy. If it doesn't work, it'll never be a market and nobody will ever sell it. But if it's not safe, we're going to put about 50 million injections into people over the next 3 or 4 months, and we will not be able to reverse it if it's not safe. And so this is the great American experiment in healthcare workers. And then also to comment on what the young lady said about mandating. I'm in the hospital. We've been mandated. It's legal for our employees to mandate. the flu vaccine. If you got to take the flu vaccine if you're going to see patients. Now they're not going to fire you, but you won't get paid. So to me, that's a mandate. If you're not going to pay me, you didn't fire me, but you're not going to pay me. That's a mandate. But
also, I hate to cut you off, but also when it comes to immunizations for schools, those of us who are parents, school-age children, they're always asking for the immunization records. And so that's why I ask about this being mandatory, because yeah, we want our kids to go back to school, especially those of us who are working from home and the kids are doing school at home. Get these kids out the house, open the schools up. And so, if they mandate the vaccine, but then we're not feeling comfortable about the vaccine, then that is other problems. So could you see that being something that becomes another item on the list of immunizations? This COVID-19.
Let me just say for this mandated issue, the hospitals here. I live in the state of Maryland. Many of the hospitals, and I just got a letter yesterday, said that they are not going to mandate this vaccine to healthcare workers for one reason. And I'll see if I can send you I'll try to see if I can white out the name of the hospital, but they said they're not mandating for one reason. We don't know that the vaccine is safe or effective. If we knew that, we would mandate it. But since we don't know that, this time around, we're not mandating. And that applies to the kids as well. I don't think anyone is going to mandate a vaccine that we don't know is safe or effective yet.
This vaccine.
McBride, and then I know. Go ahead, Hogue, and then McBride, and then we're going to.
Mike. I was just going to say the vaccine isn't approved for use in kids, so using it in children's not even an option right now. So that's first thing. One thing I wanted to mention back to the pastor's comment about economics and what's driving the decisions and so forth. And I totally understand that. I completely understand the perspective of that and what's driving the vaccine to be brought to market so quickly. The flip side of that coin is that in the hour that we're going to be together on this show, 100 people in the United States will die from coronavirus. That number is escalating rapidly. And so the reality is there are people who are dying. And so we somehow or another have got to balance the need to stop this virus somehow, because the things that we've tried to use so far to stop it have only been moderately successful. Masking is important. Social distancing is important. Those are very important things. But so far, that has not solved the problem. We still have people dying. So I think that, if there's a possibility that a vaccine can be used and it could stop some of the needless deaths that are occurring, then I think that's worth trying. And so, everything's a risk and a benefit. No matter what we do, every kind of intervention we take, is we've got to weigh the risks and we got to weigh the benefits. It's a very personal decision. It's a very individual decision we have to look at for ourselves. Personally, for me, I have decided, based on the data that I've looked at, that I'm willing to take the risk of the vaccine. I'm going to get vaccinated because I feel like that I want to prevent the disease. I have chronic underlying condition, and I don't want to get the virus because I'm worried about whether or not I would survive it if I came down with the virus. So as a result of that, I'm choosing to get the vaccine. Now, that's just my choice. And I think every person who's listening to this broadcast has got to come down to that decision. You got to be able to look at the facts. You got to be able to talk to your doctor, talk to your nurse, talk to your pharmacist, whoever's going to be giving it to you, and ask them the real questions. And then you got to make a good decision about for you, what's right for you in your particular circumstance. And so what's good for one person, another person may not feel right about or may not feel good about because of their personal circumstances. And I respect that and understand it.
It's interesting, though, because historical conversations about mandates are always interesting to me from this standpoint. In the aftermath of the polio vaccine, there was conversations about people not wanting to take that, and now it's almost ubiquitous that you're expected to do that. When Social Security numbers came out, the idea was that would never be used for any other purpose other than identification for it. We know how that's changed. Real ID is an example of this. The fact of the matter is that we can anticipate, and I think this is part of the tension that you were talking about in the very beginning with that great example from 1905 in the court case. The reality is that when the personal has to navigate in the public sphere, then that tension between individual action and state action, that the ability of states to mandate health, safety, and morals for the greater good of the community becomes an overriding imperative. That's where we are with regard to COVID-19. As uncomfortable as I am in some sense with the data, and listening to educated people talk about the data makes me even more uncomfortable. The reality is I'm actually with you, Michael, that right now, given everything that we know, it's probably best to consider this, particularly in the next few months, as our best hope in combating this in the short term. It doesn't mean that there isn't space for conversation about it, but I worry about some of the rhetoric that's happening at the national level, the lack of leadership that we have. And let's be clear, one of the things that I wanted to talk about with regard to this that I think is a failure of leadership is the fact that we are polarized as a larger society right now. So we don't have avenues to news that people feel trusting of. We don't have elected officials who have developed a deep sense of confidence in. And the reality is these have always been historical problems in the United States. You can always pinpoint this kind of strain in American history, but right now it's on steroids. Look at what's happening with regard to the election. So this is a moment where we can expect some of that to spill into these larger conversations. And in communities of color, where you have a long history of underlying health issues and a deeper mistrust of government, given some of the history associated with what Harriet Washington calls medical apartheid, we can understand why there's real concern and reticence about this vaccine.
Yeah, Dr. Nixon, I know you were trying to get in there.
I wanted to say one thing about the rush to get the vaccine out based on the need. mRNA vaccines were first started in cancer research. We've used them we've had several phase 1 and phase 2 mRNA vaccine trials. Cancer, how many people got killed by cancer this year? 600,000. There's no rush to get mRNA vaccines out for cancer. But we've had 300,000 for COVID-19 this year. Cancer kills 600,000 this year. The point that I'm making here is that we're making a rush to judgment about this vaccine. It has to be made fast. It has to be safe and it has to be effective. And those two things have not been shown. And until they're shown, I'm not taking it, nor anyone in my family or my community, until we find out that it's safe and effective. And in fact, in my community, we get it 5 times more than everyone else. Now, MIT published on Friday.
We're going to move to that.
Limited data that they had from this vaccine. We did not, the Black and brown people were not protected like others. You can pull the MIT study up. So we got to be very careful. We just can't just walk into this and with our eyes not open. There's some serious consequences to our communities if we are not careful with this vaccine. And I'm with the pastor. There's some serious issues in regards to making money here. There's serious issues. A lot of money was passed. Prepaid vaccines were given. Moderna has been on the NIAID's lunch pail for the last 6 years on this technology. So there's a lot at risk here. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of distrust with the current administration, and we really have to be careful. We just can't come out here and say we're going to take a vaccine that's not safe and not effective.
I want to thank all of you for your perspectives and what you bring to this conversation. And that's why we're having it, so that people can gather more information and make a informed decision for themselves, for their families. I know, Doc Nixon, you were trying to say something else, so we'll let you go. And then we want to move. We want to shift this just a little bit. If you want to make one more statement.
Yeah, I just want to say that it's just a little disingenuous to use the rate of our situation when we know that we have not had good leadership in this country relating to how we have related to the virus. We've had a president that has said the virus is not serious. We haven't had a strong fight against the virus. Taiwan is 100 miles from China. and they have had a concerted effort to fight the virus. They have 725 incidences and 7 deaths because they used masks, they used social distancing, they did everything that we should have done as a nation. We would not have the situation we have right now if we had a president who had done something in this country, who had taken the virus seriously, who had supported the states that were doing the things that they were doing. We would not have the situation we have right now. We have the situation we have right now because the president said it wasn't a problem, because he had these huge gatherings with no mask, no social distancing, and he had these super spreaders that are going on that are causing the spread of the virus right now. And that's why we have the situation we have right now. If we had been sane and safe, we would not have the situation we have now, and we would not have the need to be rushing a vaccine. I have no problem with a vaccine. My issue is to make sure that we have a safe vaccine and make sure that we take the time to develop a safe vaccine so that when we have a vaccine, we are certain that it is safe and that we're not rushing it because we're trying to save our economy. That's my issue here. I have no problem with the vaccine, but I'm saying that it seems as if we are rushing the vaccine because we are being pressed by economic issues, and that's what we need to be cautious about. That's my issue.
I just want to point this out, and I understand what you're saying, Pastor Nixon, but we all have to get up and go to work. So we need an economy to move. We need an economy to be doing something, because I can't keep teaching. I'm not a teacher. Like, I'm just talking as a parent. Like, my hands get tired every time somebody comes and tries to ask me to do some kind of homework that I have never seen in my life. Like, we don't do math like that. So I get the idea of we don't want to serve two gods, but at the same time, there is an economy that actually, because when we finish with this and we go, somebody's going to try to flick a light and it better turn on. And so when you have small businesses who want to get some stuff done like this, who want to get things moving, they're looking at this vaccination kind of like, oh man, I mean, I do want to put food on the table. I do want to keep my business going. So we're kind of stuck in this thing. And I feel like it's tough to put a religious spin on the vaccine as well as a political spin on the vaccine. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. I'm just a concerned parent trying to be a parent and not a teacher at the same time.
Well, and honestly, Pastor, I don't disagree with what you're saying. This vaccine should have never been politicized, and it's a shame that it was. It is an absolute crying shame that the vaccine has been politicized. It's the biggest travesty and disservice to public health that has ever occurred, that this vaccine has become politicized. I mean, we need to stop this pandemic. There's no question. And I, if we could turn back the hands of time, if we could turn them back, God help us. I wish we would have been able to do exactly what you described with Taiwan, but that's not what happened. And now we're in this mess. Now we're in an absolute mess. I wish we weren't in the mess we were in. I wish we would have done all of those things that you mentioned. And yes, leadership screwed up, and I'll say it. I'm just going to say it the way it is. It was a big mess up. Okay. And we got to improve on that in the future. I hope that we do in the future. But right now, I tell you what, I'm looking for a solution. Personally, I'm looking for a solution. There's a lot of different vaccines. We got one that was approved this week. There's one that's going to likely be approved next week. There's one more coming in January and one more coming in February, and then 2 more probably coming at the end of next year. We got a whole lot of vaccines coming to the market. And so there will be options. There will be opportunity to look at this more carefully and gain more experience. But we can't turn back the hands of time. And I think we've got to move forward, and we're going to have to say, hey, if we have this, we've learned something from this. We've learned that it is wrong to politicize public health. It is wrong to politicize the health and well-being of communities. And it is absolutely atrocious what's happened in our country with health disparities. And, that could be another discussion. I mean, it's just absolutely atrocious. I mean, the Navajo Nation right now is the highest death rate in the United States. Why? Because they've been completely discriminated against, haven't had access to health care. And we could just go on and on and on. But we got to me, this is me. I disagree with my brother in terms of the data not being there. I think the data is there. It's not 2 years worth of data. It's 2 months worth of data. I wish we had more. I wish we did. But in the midst of a pandemic, when we've got an emergency, I think we ought to be willing to take a look at this and say, okay, for me, this is what's going to work. I think the data shows that there is efficacy, and I think the data shows that there is safety. And will we know more about safety and efficacy long term? Absolutely. We'll know more. The more time that passes, the more we'll know, and that's great. But I've got enough for me to make an early decision right now, and that's where I'm at.
Right.
I have to
Well,
throw
I think we've heard from both sides. I'm sorry, but we're coming down to
Sure.
our last 15 minutes. So I'm just going to shift this just a little bit, because most of our viewers are from the Black community, and many of them are skeptical. And to be honest, I have not heard anyone in my circle say they are looking forward to receiving the vaccine. And there's reasons for that in the Black community, because this country does have a history of experimenting with various things, whether it be diseases, viruses within the Black community. So let's move on to this. Drew Altman, in a piece entitled "Black Americans Are More Skeptical of a Coronavirus Vaccine," he discusses how systematic racism has led to striking levels of reluctance to get a COVID-19 vaccine amongst Black Americans. Does the biopic community's Black, Indigenous people of color have legitimate reasons from history to be skeptical of the current vaccine? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the history and how do we overcome that history within the Black community, or any community that understands that people have been used as experiments, guinea pigs as such. Lisa, I'll throw it to you just to talk to us a little bit. I know you have some things to share with us as well.
Sure. I mean, I don't know as much about what we're talking about as my esteemed colleagues here, so I've been listening and taking notes. I do know that knowledge and power over knowledge, and knowledge as a currency, is something that goes back kind of to the Enlightenment. And so I study more of the early modern world, but I know there's a long history of people being at the mercy of those who own the knowledge, and there being so disadvantaged communities, and specifically the Black community in this case, have a long history of not being taken seriously by the medical profession, the medical establishment, the history of how medicine and even our universities and science was formed, the way we looked at people's bodies, the way we racked and stacked value, where, enslaved people, but especially women, serving as guinea pigs for gynecological experimentation, just to go back to some of the early things, and assumptions being made about lung capacity, when it got regards to use of tobacco, and how people that could handle work or pain. These ideas have a long track record that go back, and unfortunately, we know that the scientific community makes assumptions and it interprets data based on those assumptions. Again, going back a long way, like, archaeological finds that we assumed when they had certain kinds of tools, they must be male because they're hunters, when we've now found out they are often female. So this is the kind of thing that happens, and we don't mean it to. So yes, there's a long history. I study the development of the ideas of race in the Enlightenment period, when we are starting to rack and stack people and try to think of this scientifically. And what the scientific community, I will say for this, is the scientific community is a series of conversations just like the ones that we're having, where we have scientists who say, we're going to build on the knowledge we have, we're going to disagree, we're going to keep debating, and we want there not to be hegemonic knowledge. And that gives me encouragement, like, to see this kind of thing happening here. But for people who, like me, this is not our field, we feel very disadvantaged, and people whose entire lives are dependent on kind of the goodwill of others, there's a huge disadvantage to them. And I think Black Americans have known for a long time that their pains, their concerns, are not taken seriously by the medical establishment, and that goes back to the development of the history of medicine.
Can I throw something in, just a real-time example of the issue of trust? And I agree with everything that Lisa said. So my soon-to-be husband is half Indigenous Peruvian, half Black. And my soon-to-be married name will be Lobotan, which literally means wolf cub, but in the colonial Spanish translation literally means mongrel. And that was the name given to people of mixed race. So my married name in about a week will be Lobotan. And I was talking to my mother-in-law about this. My soon-to-be husband will be moving here, and as a man of color, right? He considers himself a black man. My mother-in-law is deeply concerned about him coming here. She is far more afraid of him coming to the United States than staying in Peru. And this has been a question that she has had is, she knows I work at Loma Linda. She knows I work in healthcare. And her big concern is, can we trust healthcare? Will the healthcare system be good to him? Because there is a history, as much as the world has not been kind to people of color across time and space, there is a distinctive history here in the United States that is very, very upsetting. And, I think that in order for us to have this trust, right, to rebuild this trust, I think people need to be, I think a comfort level has to be established with seeing efficacy across the color spectrum. Because I think that is the fear is this, if I could put, voice to what my mother-in-law is talking about, is this a drug, right? Is this a vaccine that has been tested on white people, but will be given to everyone and will have a negative fallout? And so I think that maybe dovetails into our next question that I see in the chat is, who is this being tested on? And do we have representation in the testing population?
Dr. Uhuru.
Well, that's literally how it's tied to Black Lives Matter, although people would not want to see it in that context. The reality is that's been the fundamental question associated with that movement is, if everything's based on a Eurocentric paradigm, then how can we trust that this is going to serve people of color, particularly the African-American community, in ways that will be beneficial to the community? Having said that, we've spent a lot of time talking about the dual pandemic of racism and now COVID-19. And if we look at some of those numbers, and I see a lot of people in the comments talking about
Dr. Williams, right quick, did you put that slide going right now?
Yep.
All right,
I wanted to show you this. Can you still see it?
Yeah, we got you.
Can you see it? Yeah, so, I see a lot of people talking about the Tuskegee experiment in the comments, but the reality is that if you read Harriet Washington's Medical Apartheid, Tuskegee is a small part, just a very, very small piece of the discriminatory practices that have been used in healthcare and in science, eugenics. I mean, there's so many things that we can talk about. I mention that because I understand that skepticism from that lens, because if we consider some of the chronic health conditions that really exacerbate COVID-19 outcomes, 13.8% of African Americans report having fair health compared with 8.3% of non-Hispanic whites. We know underlying conditions can exacerbate this problem. Obesity, we know, is a major something that exacerbates the problem. CDC says 80% of African American women self-reported identify as being obese or overweight. So, and you see this map here that charts that, and look at where the concentrations are. We have the largest concentrations of people of color. 2017, 12.6% of African American children had asthma compared with 7.7% of non-Hispanic white children. Again, if we're looking at that as an underlying condition, and we know that this is a disease that really attacks respiration, we can understand why this data informs people's healthy skepticism about it. We look at health coverage. We know that the Affordable Health Care Act has made a difference in terms of coverage. But if we're talking about the uninsured rates and what kind of coverage people have, then certainly we can understand why there's also concern about this, because if you do contract the virus, are you going to have sufficient medical coverage to be able to get yourself right? So there's so many things here that culminate in why communities of color are concerned about this. This political cartoon is very disturbing, but I think it makes the point. Many of our COVID fatalities have underlying conditions. What are the three that are most prevalent? Well, we've talked a lot about nursing homes, but the fact is, if you're poor and you're Black, and if you look at the leading cause of death among African Americans, heart disease, cancer, accidents, so on and so forth, this is the reason why so many researchers, so many educators, so many skeptics are saying this is why this disease we have to view it through the lens of race. We have to talk about this in the context of race. At the same time, and I want to be sensitive to this, Pastor is right, and Michael is right. If there had been the response necessary in the very beginning to approach this from a clear and sober perspective, perhaps we could be talking about other interventions that could have been successful. But because everything in this country is racialized, and we see this in a million ways, We are now in a position where we have to think about the more extreme response and think about it in the terms of what Martin Luther King wrote in 1956. We all have to live together or we're going to die together. And right now, if this disease continues unabated, we're looking at a situation where a lot of people are going to die. We have to evaluate that.
Could I just say, I want to make sure the listeners know too. First of all, the study is publicly available and it can be accessed. And Pastor, maybe we can get that information up. I can get it to you and we can get that disseminated out so people can read it for themselves. That'd be great. But what I wanted to state is when the FDA approved the studies that the manufacturers did for the vaccines, they told the manufacturers that they needed to enroll into the studies a representative sample that would reflect the U.S. population, that they did not need to just have a white study, that they needed to have a representative sample. And so it's not perfect, I will tell you this, but just under 10% of the people in the Pfizer study were African-American. Just about 28% were Hispanic or Latino or Latinx, and 4% were Asian. Those are percentages that are roughly reflective of the U.S. population. That's a little bit of an overrepresentation of the Hispanic population in the study compared to the U.S. population of 18%. And is that perfect? No, that's not perfect. But I would say that is an improvement. That is a drastic improvement from what we've seen in some studies that have been done in this country in medicine in the past, where people of color have been completely excluded or completely underrepresented. I think these studies did a better job of being more representative.
The studies by MIT that were published. The studies by MIT that were published on Friday demonstrate that the COVID-19 vaccine was less effective in Blacks and Asians. And it's a small number of patients, but it just brings you to the point that we as African Americans have to consider not just the efficacy of this vaccine, but the safety. And I want us to be clear. We have to be very careful about this vaccine in regards to our race and how it will be effective in our race, and will it be safe for us? We have to be very, very diligent and watchful, and not accept people telling you that this vaccine is safe. This vaccine is not safe. It's not proven to be safe yet. We have to do more work in order to figure that out.
But it also has to come with the realization that we were talking about earlier, that, and I'll give the example of the bus driver from Detroit. African Americans are disproportionately in those positions where they're not going to be able to work from home, where they're in public service, where poverty puts them in a position where they're not going to be able to take some of the steps necessary to adequately social distance, from the places we live to the places we work to the type of work that we do. So the reality is that while I agree wholeheartedly with that assessment, perhaps, Michael, part of the challenge here is that the people who have the most vulnerabilities should have been the greater proportion of the study. If we're talking about, and I realize that that's anathema to science, but the reality is that if we're talking about segments of the population that have more vulnerability, if you're going to get them, then you're probably going to end up being able to deal with the folks who have more resilience. What worries me about this is that I think that what gets written out of that is, and you brought this up earlier, Pastor McBride, thinking about the school teacher situation, right? Why is it, you have so many teachers across the country asking the question, why is it okay for them to go to work and no one's concerned about their families? And the young people who are then asked to go back and take public transportation to school and still be involved in public space. We know what people are saying out of Europe, but the reality is that at the core, and I agree with this argument 1,000%, when it comes to race, you'll always find that Black and brown voices are discounted in a way that creates and encourages this notion of invisibility of what's happening in our community. That's why we have had this whole Black Lives Matter movement with a whole language around pay attention to race, pay attention to Black lives, because that's really where the trauma is most acute. I think where I agree with this argument here is that that's really where we need to be right now, because that's where the trauma will be most acute. When this scales up, we will see it scale up more dramatically in communities of color, and we have to be on top of that.
Amen. Dr. Nixon will allow you to go, and then Pastor McBride, you can chime in right after that.
Thing that Harriet Washington says in her book of Medical Apartheid, she ends by saying that with the safeguards in place now, with the CDC and the Food and Drug Administration, that Blacks can be confident that many of the things that have happened in the past will not happen now. And so she encourages people not to stare away from things like taking vaccines and so on and so forth. But the challenge is that today, 72% of Blacks are resistant to taking the vaccine. And so because of this, there is a coalition of Black doctors and nurses and clergy that are coming together to bring confidence and trust into the African-American community for the vaccine. The coalition is made up of the president of the National Black Nurses Association, Martha Dawson, along with a coalition of the president of Meharry College, Howard University School of Medicine, Morehouse School of Medicine, Charles R. Drew University School of Medicine and Science, and they're combining with the National Medical Association, Cobb Institute, Urban League, blackdoctors.org, and they're coming together because they recognize that they need to build trust in the Black community for the virus. So the only way that we'll be able to counteract the long history, hundreds of years of history of abuse that has happened in the Black community is for Black professionals in the areas of science and medicine to come forward and step forward and say that they have been involved in the process from day one on the scientific side and also in the clinical trial side, and let Black people know in the Black community that this is a vaccine that can be trusted. And if that does not happen, you will have still large amounts of people from the Black community who will not trust the vaccine. So that's very important in this process.
I want to ask this question just before we go with our wrap up, and you all pray for me as I take that deep breath to wrap this up. But the question is, and it had a lot of on the chat. Where's Bill Gates in response to this vaccine? If anyone has an answer to that, I'm gonna give you like 10 seconds.
Bill Gates is a man who's done incredible work in the vaccine world. He's done more for us in regards to his spirit of giving. Bill Gates has a spirit that many Christians don't have. That is, he gives his money to his causes. And if we looked at the tithe registry, we would see that yeah, I'll go there. We'll see our commitment with our money is not like what Bill Gates is doing. So we shouldn't criticize Bill Gates. We should embrace Bill Gates because he's provided his resources to help us find new vaccines and in a way that's different than the way we practice our giving in our churches.
Hey, Milton, thank you so much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been watching the conversation where it has been our responsibility in this segment of our broadcast to try to help you understand whether or not you should take the vaccine for COVID-19. And we've hit, I wouldn't even want to say we've hit the middle of the road. Now, one of the things that we all agreed on is that, man, this should not have been politicized. It is just flat out just unfair to the public, unfair to the world around us for us to have to decide whether this is Democratic or Republican. This is a health matter. That means all bodies on deck. Everybody needs to be concerned whether or not this should be done. We also tossed in the idea of whether or not this should be put on a religious turntable to decide if that is. But what we've come to understand is that historically speaking, we have to be concerned whether or not our Black and brown communities are having any representation in response to what's going on here with this vaccine. History has shown us that sometimes Black and brown communities are the lab rats when it comes to this, or they're just left out of this. But one of the other things that came up about this, and Michael brought this out, is that, look, as it relates to him, his underlying health concerns, he's looking at this like, I have to take this because I don't want this vax. I don't want this this COVID. Milton is looking at this like, hey guys, look, historically speaking, my community, who I am and what I've got going on, I have not seen that this vaccine is safe. Now, we've learned that there are 4 phases, and I can't go at those 4 phases, Brittany, like you did in response to how a vaccine comes about. But what she showed us is that the historical perspective sometimes leaves out individuals who need to be concerned and put in there. We saw some stats that came up that showed that there were white individuals who took this, Hispanic individuals who were part of the trials for the vaccine, and also Black communities. Now, the rates of how much or who was involved, the disparity is, we don't necessarily like that. But the fact is, brothers and sisters, we're looking at a pandemic that is destroying our worlds as we know it. There's no more normal. It's not going to be that way. But one of the things I loved about having Pastor Nixon on this particular conversation is, while we want to steer away from an idea of religious or even put it on there, truth is, when he brought out the point of not being able to serve God and man, it was a real point. What's the real reason why this vaccine is coming out so fast? We really hope that it is to save lives instead of just saving money or getting some money. Because at the end of the day, a business wants you all, me and you, to come out and work it. So we would hope and trust that as you try to make this decision on whether or not you should be vaccinated, one of our people on our chat said they're going to talk to the Lord and they're going to make this a true decision of surrender. I totally understand that. Someone said they're going to sit here and they're not going to take that. We truly understand that. Fact of the matter is, brothers and sisters, the time has not been given to fully vet this vaccine, but something must be done. So you've got to ask yourself, some real deep questions. Am I going to be a part of helping this world get rid of this vaccine? And you got to ask yourself the question, how are you going to do it? Are you going to do it by spreading things that necessarily aren't true? Are you going to also do it by politicizing stuff that shouldn't be? But are you going to do it by trying to make sure that you are an example to others out there? We look at our presidents and former presidents who are saying, you know what, I'm going to take this thing. I want to show our world that this is something that we're working with. Now, Nixon brought up that final quote that said that we're going to trust the FDA and the CDC because they're making changes to make this thing go about and for Black and brown communities to feel safe while they do this. The truth here is, guys, listen, talk to your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. If you believe in him, if you see him, talk to him, because truthfully, this is a personal decision. You've got to decide if you trust what's out there so that you can make a decision. You've been listening to the conversation where I've taken a deep breath to try to wrap up this thing, and I know I've missed some points, but join us back on next week where we'll discuss more conversations. We've had a wonderful panel on here. I'm gonna turn the time right back over to my wonderful co-host. He is Pastor Jenkins.
Amen. We thank you for that wrap up. And I just want to say thank you to all those who are present with us, who have contributed today. We've learned so much, and everyone, you have to make a decision for yourself. Yes, there's more to be learned, but keep on learning, keep on researching, keep on asking questions, and make a decision that's best for you and your family. In the meantime, wear your mask and wash your hands. Amen. All right. But thank you all for joining us today. We're going to close out with a word of prayer, and we'll let you all know what's happening for next week regarding the conversation. And we want to thank all those who viewed today and who are viewing this later. Thank you for tuning in, because we know that you could have been anywhere else, but we pray that you have been blessed on today. Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, you have been great to us, and we've learned a lot today. Thank you for the collective knowledge and experience of those who have joined us today. And I pray, Lord, that all of us are just a little bit better off in terms of making a decision. We want to do the best thing possible. We want to be safe and we want to be healthy. Yes, we want to help the economy because individuals have to work and we got to make money. Help us, Lord, to do the best thing. So continue to speak to us as we continue to gain knowledge. I pray that you would be with everyone who is on the conversation today in their individual areas of work and influence. And I pray, Lord, that you would be with them, that they can be that godly spiritual influence within the areas where they work and the spheres of that they move in and out of. Continue to be with them. Bless and keep them, we ask and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you all again for being with us and for blessing us. And we will see you next time on The Conversation.